I grew up in not the wealthiest of places, but I have seen how communities have been able to support each other through collaborative mechanisms that they create. And this is something called village banking in Zambia or Chilimbas. So village banking is where you put money together with a group of trusted friends. You come together and put money towards savings. So each month you're depositing something. So there are different concepts. Some of them are profit making, others are simply for savings. And there are others which are more geared towards ceremonies, like births, funerals, marriages. So it's really a communal way of supporting each other, and it's centered on trust, and it's centered on decentralization, and it's also focused on a bottom-up approach where everyone wins.
Welcome to the Future Money podcast presented by the Interledger Foundation, where we invite people of all backgrounds and disciplines to imagine what a financial inclusive future might be. I'm Lawal Karama, the Program Officer of the Interledger Foundation.
I'm Hollis Wong-Ware, a Community Ambassador with the Interledger Foundation.
This season, we're focusing on the creative arts, and in this episode, we are in conversation with Esther Mwema.
She will be sharing about her project, Sikhula Sonke, Living Archives of Afrofuturist Village Banking, which she created together with Jon Adam Chen and 3 different communities in Zambia and South Africa. We will discuss with Esther how this artwork shaped her vision of a financially inclusive future, her pathway towards becoming an artist, and how moving around the world has influenced her today.
Hey Esther, welcome to the Future Money podcast. So we're so glad to have you. So one of the first questions I wanted to ask you is about your presence in the tech sector and the fact that your first job was at an internet cafe. Could you tell us more about your entry into this field?
It was a very funny experience because there was no real job description. I was just like managing the place. I was sweeping, I was being a typist. And also considering at that time, that was like 2010, 2011, the internet wasn't as widespread in the small town that I was living in. At that time, I was in Kabwe, Zambia. And so a lot of people would come to internet cafes to get their work typed, to go online. And so I think I was one of the earliest people to actually have a Facebook account, because that was when Facebook was becoming popular. And I would see that the internet cafe, either typing someone's assignments or dissertation and managing the different computers. And I would be on Facebook making friends all over the world. So, it was a time.
That's so cool. And yeah, I think early days, I'm sure it felt just like sky's the limit in terms of the internet. But I'm curious how like that initial experience working at the internet cafe, learning about the web and kind of being at a hub, like a physical hub of your community, how that kind of led towards your interest in and passion for internet governance and understanding internet inequity, especially given all of the places that you've studied and lived.
Yeah, I think the immigrant experience is quite crucial to my journey because you're looking for rootedness. And so having had access to the internet at that time, I was exposed to different ideas, to different people from different communities. And one of the most important topics to me at that time, and still today, was about safety of girls. And so because I had time and not a lot of commitments at that age, I started a blog called Safety First for Girls. And I was writing about understanding why the world works the way it does, but from a context of feminism, from a context of gender equality. And that was also at the time when feminism was not viewed in a way that it is today, where it's more accepted and people can easily identify as that. So using the internet as a platform to share my thoughts, I was able to connect with other young girls from across the globe. And that's how I decided, oh, I don't want to be the face behind this work, but to just put it as a name where I hold a space and different girls can share their safety experiences, safety tips. And that's how it came to be that I started engaging online and building communities online and offline. And this work built up when I studied my BA in journalism. And from then on, I have had the opportunity to apply for different experiences. I would have to say it was a very challenging time in thinking about career and also thinking about my place in the world in terms of what I was supposed to do. It was easy to choose a role that perhaps I'll just work at a TV station or at a radio station, all which are good. But I didn't feel like that encompassed my entire expression, what I wanted to express. And that's how I started my journey in using the internet. But there's more to that, of course.
Obviously, like the internet has transformed several lifetimes since the couple of decades that we've grown up with it as well. Do you remember kind of a moment where that intersection of the internet and equity was really like highlighted to you, or what made you interested in a type of activism in that space?
Yeah. So I was going through different things. I worked for advertising firms. I worked for real estate firms in copywriting. But at some point, I saw an opportunity to learn about the history and futures of internet governance through Internet Society. And that was the first time that I actually heard the term internet governance. And I was like, oh, what does this mean? And through that fellowship, I was able to attend the fourth Internet Governance Forum in Geneva, Switzerland. And that really opened my eyes to the disparities, to the difference between what happens at the grassroots level and at the high level. Because when I say we, I'll say that the fellows who were selected by Internet Society were one of the few young people to attend that global forum. And it was through that experience that I and other young people decided to co-create another organization called Digital Grassroots. We decided to get more young people and create pathways for young people in marginalized communities to engage in internet governance. And looking back, obviously, starting two organizations, I'm like, oh, that is a lot of my childhood gone trying to do advocacy work. But at the same time, I recognize the importance of being there in the room when people are talking about what our digital future looks like. And that's really when I started understanding the role that I can play as an individual, and also by collaborating with other young people. Through this experience, I was also able to get a fellowship to study my master's at the London School of Economics. And my main focus of study was technology and justice, because there is a big gap that we don't really talk about when it comes to the digital ecosystem. So my journey as a digital inequalities practitioner started in that way. And throughout that experience, I had always used art as a way of expressing myself.
Could you tell us more about your experience and, of course, your focus on digital inequality?
When you grow up in Zambia and you're trying to receive money for your work, it's very, very difficult. Even today, you could have a PayPal account, but you would not be able to receive money simply because you're in Zambia. And as an open internet leader for democracy, through my work, I believe that we all need to have autonomy. And the initial design of the internet was built to be open, interoperable. And this is something that is not really reflected in payment systems because it's really exclusionary. And I really experienced that in running a global organization that is based from Africa in terms of receiving grants, in terms of paying people, in terms of the trust that we are able to receive that is given to others simply based on where they're located or their nationality.
So this also makes me curious as to what role art played into your focus on digital inequality.
I've been doing art for the longest time, and what really helped me was recently I got an opportunity to like the dream job with the United Nations UN Women. And it was a time to learn as well as to find myself and see who do I want to be in the world? Do I have to give up a part of myself in order to succeed career-wise, or is there a way to combine what I love? And so actually this year, I set out to say, I want to do art and technology. I don't want them to be separate, but I want them to be combined. And opportunities like the Future Money grant helped me to do that because I was able to combine my technology and art. And I also was able to get another opportunity with the Sea Change Creative R&D Lab, where I was able to work with Digital Grassroots, my organization, to digitize our digital rights monopoly game. So we are gamifying digital literacy. So that was exciting. And also an opportunity to be a Prince Claus Seed Award grantee. And so I was like, well, I guess this is the right way to go.
I love that. Big congratulations for all those accolades. And I think that's a very relatable sentiment. I know Lowell and I both really feel that is just the external pressure to compartmentalize yourself under the auspices of achievement or making yourself almost more intelligible, because sometimes it feels chaotic both internally and externally to be both a practicing artist and somebody who's working in the spaces of whether it's tech policy, equity, financial innovation. And yeah, I mean, to that end, I would love to shift towards talking about the project that you and your collaborator developed as part of the Future Money Grant, and would love for you to share with our audience what the origin and initial thoughts of that project were, and then we can talk about what it looked like in practice.
Yeah, that is exciting, actually. I had the great opportunity to collaborate with Jon Adam Chen on Sikhula Sonke, which means we grow together, living archives of Afrofuturist. I grew up in not the wealthiest of places, but I have seen how communities have been able to support each other through collaborative mechanisms that they create. And this is something called village banking in Zambia, or Chilimbas. So village banking is where you put money together with a group of trusted friends. You come together and put money towards savings. So each month you're depositing something. So there are different concepts. Some of them are profit making, others are simply for savings. And there are others which are more geared towards ceremonies, like births, funerals, marriages. So it's really a communal way of supporting each other, and it's centered on trust, and it's centered on decentralization, and it's also focused on a bottom-up approach where everyone wins. It's open in that way. And being able to collaborate with Jon Adam, who has had experience in South Africa, has lived there, studied there, we were able to think about village banking as an Afrofuturist concept. What does it look like when our financial systems are modeled on practices that we've had for centuries, practices we've had pre-colonial times? And so that was really the essence. But before we could imagine, we had to build those archives. And that was the essence of creating living archives of village banking. And so we had perspectives from rural, township, and urban setups just to collect stories. And what was really fascinating, and it wasn't really intentional in that sense, was that this was a predominantly women-led initiative. All the groups we reached out to were predominantly led by women, and I think all of them were women. So it's not like we set out only to reach out to women, but it's like we just wanted to know who's practicing this and how has it benefited their communities. And I really loved our approach, given that we wanted it to be centered on the community. It's really easy to create an art piece where you know the concept, so you just make the art based on what you know. But for us, it was about bringing the communities as co-creators. And that's where the music comes in. That's where the constitution comes in.
What do you feel like springing from the realization of this project and its installation at the Interledger Summit? I mean, just so that folks who haven't seen it, I can just paint a picture. Like, you essentially created a round table with a tapestry hanging down, and it was like a really warm, it was like we were coming to the table, like almost to come to eat or to hang out or to have conversation. And you featured the audio of these conversations paired with photographs on tablets. And I also witnessed that you and Jon had many conversations with Interledger Summit attendees. And I'm curious what was kind of sparked there that you might understand as being like, oh, okay, this was a conversation maybe I didn't anticipate, or this gave me an idea for how to either deepen this art piece or something else I'd like to explore in my next work.
Mm-hmm. As with every exhibition, you only know if the message is clear until you put it up. Many of the conversations we had was just the feeling of being at home. Someone saw the artwork and said, oh, that reminds me of my grandmother. And others came in and said, oh, these plates look similar to what we use in our community. And it just showed the interconnectedness of the global majority, because some of the things that I thought was unique to Zambia or unique to South Africa actually had resonance for people who have never been in that part of the world. And it showed that we have a similar concept when we think about wealth, when we think about well-being. And that's what really those conversations were about, creating a healing space, because most of village banking is about ceremonies. And so this is a place where we come together to think, to talk, to share. And that's why that table was there, where people are coming sort of to have a meal, to listen to stories. And that's how we lived, a sort of centeredness and rootedness, where you're rooted in your community, you're centered on the stories that have carried us from generations to generations. Stories of resilience, stories of empowerment, and stories of feminism in a culture where it's highly patriarchal. So that was very powerful. And part of the experience for us was also learning that there is need for different village banks in different communities to communicate with each other, because we have similar concepts, but if we're not communicating, then those nodes, I'm putting it in quotes, the nodes, the Interledger nodes, those nodes are not communicating. There needs to be that communication and that trust built to show that this system has been supporting our communities, and also recognizing what the shortfalls of that is. It's not always a happy story when trust is broken and money is lost. There is no reinforcement, or how can we support our communities when that happens. So that knowledge exchange for us is something that came up that needs to be done. And also importantly is creating the virtual exhibition, because we want it to be accessible to everyone and make sure that even those who cannot see it are able to read the transcript and also read the Constitution, which I thought showed democracy in a very interesting way. Each village bank creates their own constitution and govern themselves. So self-governance.
How was it for the community to participate within your art project? Because it reminds me of something I saw from an African architect. I believe he's from Mali, and he built buildings within with his village. So he saw how that type of agency kind of like changed how they viewed his profession, but then also how they participated within the build of certain structures. Like even children helped moving bricks because they were like, now I have agency within this structure that we just put down. I'm kind of like curious if kind of like you had the same experience while working with these communities.
My practice always takes an African feminist and decolonial approach. So it can be very easy to fall into an extractive practice where you say, I'm the artist, I know what I'm doing. And so give me your existence and I'll present it. And so taking a decolonial approach in this project was really about stepping back as an artist and listening. So I knew that we had to exhibit something and we wanted to tell stories and to create an archive. But it was really a discipline to not decide on behalf of the communities what that would be. And so when we're reaching out to people in our communities, it was really tell us your stories. You're inviting us into your homes. You're inviting us into the practice you have created, something that has been sustaining your community. And so that's how we went about it. But this method takes time. And as I always mention, it takes trust because they have to trust you as well to invite you into their homes and to share how they do village banking, because it's also finance and people sometimes are not the most comfortable talking about money. So that's how we set out to do it. It actually took a lot more time to get the meetings because we wanted it to be really a safe space and a free, open space for sharing. Jon Adam went to Kailicha where he has roots there, and we were able to get stories from the township setting, and I was able to get stories from Lusaka, Zambia, where I grew up. And one of my allies and friends from the fellowship I was in was able to invite us to the Eastern Cape, Case Kamahook, and connect us to her community simply because she heard of it. And it was really amazing because that took a different approach than I expected because it was focused on, she is a healer and she heals through music and using the calabash as well. So getting that connection to how people see wealth as a cultural context was really a stroke of luck and also just meant to be. And their community was very welcoming. So part of our exhibition included the music that was sang as we were being welcomed into the space, the prayers that were put in as before they shared food with us, and also the objects that were part of the setup there.
I love that. And yeah, I'd love for you to just talk about that a little bit more, about how your own personal understanding of what wealth means and how to define wealth was transformed through this project. And also to kind of like expound on the metaphor of the calabash and like the significance of the gourd and also what you see it representing within this model of village banking.
Having grown up in this system and understanding village banking, for me, it was about how can we ensure that what happens in our local communities is presented in a way that has agency and autonomy, because many times when people come into our communities, they have a preset mind on who we are and how to present it. And it's usually presented as people who need saving or people who are not technologically advanced. when ultimately technology is about making life easier, it's about solving a certain problem. And so for me, being part of this, it made me realize that wealth in our context is not individual. It's not about my savings alone. It's about our community growing together. And that's why we called it Sikhula Sonke, which is isiXhosa for we grow together. And so participating in that sense, and encountering the calabash or the calabash seed helped me to learn about the qualities of resilience, because village banking is something that has been part of our generations. One of the oldest people who we interviewed was close to 80 and was talking about their grandmother practicing village banking, or in South Africa, it's called stokvels, and there are different names for it. So it shows that even during times of oppression and suppression, we created systems that could be replicated in our communities and still have longevity and still be inclusive in that way. So I think that was the most amazing part of it. And it made me imagine, what would it be if those village banking between our countries in Africa, would our financial systems look different? Because our countries are right now heavily in debt, and that shapes the policies, and that shapes the quality of healthcare, the quality of food, the quality of life. It shapes the life expectancy. So for me, it was not just seeing money as a currency, but seeing it as a system, a way of life.
I also find it, because I thought it was interesting that you mentioned the fact that, or you keep on mentioning how important agency is. I always feel like within our society, or let's say modern society, that especially if you look at African countries or other regions in the global south, that the savior complex, or what is it, modern society drives the savior complex, because we can't understand previous animistic cultures that were on like European soil or Western soil. And it's a very large contra into experiencing life as well.
Yeah, it's very true, because the reason these archives are important is that it's easy to forget that these qualities that we look for in technology of openness, decentralization, inclusivity have always existed, and they have been refined in our own way, in a way that fits the way of life that is respectful to other humans, but also respectful to the environment that we live in. And so it's really all connected. And I really saw this project as enlightening, and seeing the openness that people had to share, even when they would be perceived as poor in our economic terms. So yeah, it was enlightening.
Do you believe like village banking could kind of like change the epistemic culture or knowledge base?
It exists in many parts of the world. And one thing that the Open Studio at the Interledger Summit opened for me is that it exists in not only in Southern Africa, it exists in West Africa, it exists in India, and even in the Western world, it exists as GoFundMe, though it's a different style, but it is crowdsourced financing in that sense. So these systems have existed for a long time, but it's really about giving them the credit that they deserve, and not thinking that we need to create new things or create payment systems based on things that do not exist, or based on Silicon Valley's dream of what the world is. And this project was very important. These archives are important because they are reminding us of what is, and they're giving us an opportunity to imagine what could be. And imagination, I think, is one of the most powerful tools in shaping the future, because our current economic system is based on something that was decided in 1944 by some countries who decided, let's make the World Bank, let's make the IMF. And since then, we've been trying to, our countries have been trying to recover economically, but it's like fighting a battle that you're not going to win because it was never built with us in mind. And so really this project, the aim is to start our thinking, because what we imagine is what is going to be. And if we don't imagine as being economically independent as countries, or if we don't imagine that we can have financial systems that are open and inclusive, then it would not happen.
I think that's so beautiful. And I completely agree with you that we have to be able to imagine what is possible for it to come into being. And I think that's like really the beauty of all of the projects of the Future Money Open Studios, was these initial seeds of possibility and what can they inspire in conversation with technologists. So I am curious, like whether it was at the Interledger Summit or otherwise, if you had any initial seeds of like, oh, what could this look like in practice? Like, what would this model of village banking look like? Obviously, like you cited the ways in which we see it kind of pop up organically. Like, it's so true. Like GoFundMe is not only a type of like collective crowdsourcing, but it's often filling in systemic gaps, right? So at least pretty consistently. And so, yeah, I'm just curious about like what came to you in terms of like the interaction between the digital and the more kind of like analog in-person tangible community building.
I think what I appreciated about the method that we took, that Jon Adam and I took to do this project, is that we went in with a blank slate. Of course, we did research on what exists in, what do people say about village banking, but we also went very open to learn from the communities. And I'll share two stories. The first one is from a professor from ZICAS, which is an accountancy university in Lusaka, Zambia. And this professor called Prudence is working on using village banking and adopting machine learning for village banking to see its viability. And also she has a prototype to build a tool for village banking and seeing how can people use technology to do village banking. And what that opened for me is that solutions are being made. They're being prototyped on the ground. People are using technology shaped by our own ecosystems. And the opportunity that I had to speak with her to learn about her research and her practice really showed me that art always reflects what is being practiced. So even though it could be in its early stages, it means that the idea is already out there and it's just waiting to be captured and implemented. So that was one of the stories. And the second story was also with my colleague Bongiwe, who is a healer, and she uses healing to bring her community together. And a lot of the community she brings together also practice village banking. And it was seeing how she uses music as a tool and uses the calabash as a tool to create music, to bring healing, how it connects us to our past and shows that wealth is not only tangible things, it's also the intangible things. It's reminding us of our culture. It's reminding us of that we don't have to rely on different systems for things like healing and mental health when we actually have those systems in our culture. So filling in those systemic gaps in unconventional ways, it already exists. It just needs visibility, and it needs to go into the mainstream narrative as well, because it is just as valid.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm curious, based on this project, what's next for you, and how are you thinking about transmuting this experience into future work?
Yeah, that is a good question. In terms of the next step for this project, obviously the virtual exhibition is a big one. And part of our commitment was also writing a long form article that expands on these ideas and just shares more deeply what the lessons were. So that's something that we're going to be doing. And for us, it's always also going back to the communities and telling them, this is the work that you co-created with us, and this is how you can replicate it. So editing the photos, putting them together, sending them back to the communities, and obviously always collaborating with the community liaisons that we worked with, who were amazing with translations, amazing with bringing the community together in one space. The village banks groups that we work with, they have existed for many years. So I believe they'll still be existing for many years going forward. So thinking about what comes next is always about going back to the community and seeing what support looks like for them, and also seeing how that can build into what we think of open payment systems from an Afrofuturist perspective or Afrocentric perspective.
You know, as we come to the close of this conversation, I would love to hear any final thoughts you have about financial inclusion and thinking about the communities that were part of your piece, the conversations that you had, the possibilities therein. What is your vision for a financially equitable future?
A lot of the people we work with are somewhere in between formal and informal, and formal engagements of interactions and informal methods of interactions with their banks. So it's really thinking, how does financial inclusion connect to the wider open internet principles in terms of accessibility, in terms of security, privacy and security, and in terms of freedom to be forgotten or permission to be forgotten. A lot of our financial identity is tied to our history. In the Western world, it could be credit scores. In our part of the world, it could be credit bureaus or banks. So it's thinking about, what does financial freedom and financial inclusion look like without surveillance? What does it look like in a democratic sense, where I get to choose where I keep my money and where it goes? And also thinking about, is a future possible where the amount of money you have does not equal to having your basic needs met? And how can technology make that possible? People talk about a universal basic income, and my view on that is money is not the problem, because money exists and there's enough money to solve hunger right now, but it hasn't solved it. So it's really about thinking about, how are we as human beings supposed to meet the needs of the ones who are not in the formal system, immigrants or persons with different abilities, or simply people who have been left out, who are not in education or in schools, or do not have a birth certificate. That's really what inclusion looks like. We could create an open system that works if you have a phone, but not everyone is able to have that. So maybe changing the system, what would that look like? And can we start that imagination now, so that at least maybe in 10 or 50 years, we could have something different? I'd be excited for that.
Yeah, me as well. I can't wait, to be honest, for that to happen. And that's kind of like how we continue and how new models are created, but we're still doing the same thing over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And after a couple of generations, you just get tired of it.
Yeah, and the poor get poorer and the richer get richer, and it just brings more social ills.
It does, very much.
Yeah, but I think the change is happening, and to see like the Interledger Foundation, what you're doing, is already a big sign that things are changing, people's minds are changing, and it's just about getting it into the main narrative. So one thing I realized is in life, when things are changing, there's always a pushback because people are very comfortable with the status quo and saying, well, the risk is too high. Maybe we should continue as we are. But really, we are doing that push right now. And just having this conversation is a push in that direction. And I'm hopeful.
Thank you, Esther, so much for all of your thoughtful work. And thank you also for modeling what it looks like to not restrict or mute or compartmentalize parts of yourself and your curiosity and your imagination and your desire for innovation. And I think it's really inspiring to see you move forward in a space where you feel empowered by both your arts practice and your tech policy and equity lens.
Thank you to Interledger and to all of you who are working hard to make this possible, because it's about also getting people to agree to hosting a space like this, a space where imagination is possible and where trust is given. And I felt a lot of trust in this space, and I really am grateful so much for this.
We did it.
We did it. You're right.
We did it.
Yay.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you.
Amazing.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. This was great.
Yeah.
To learn more about the Interledger Foundation, visit our website where you can find all of the published episodes
and more information on our guests, grant programs, and our resources at interledger.org.
Thank you for listening.